review of Earth history. Let me share my screen and bring up the questions that we've been going to be working on. So Earth first began to form at 4.6 billion years ago. So that's kind of when it began to cool. So that would be the first answer here. How long did it take to cool? 600 million years. That was the Hadean eon. It's the first eon. The second eon was the Archean eon. It ended 2.5 billion years ago. So it went from 4 billion, so about 1.5 billion years, to the Proterozoic eon. But so those are the first two eons. The first continent that formed was Valbara. It was small. It was relative to today's continents. It was not very big at all. There's remnants of it in South Africa. They're called Cantons. And Australia has chunks of them. There are these islands of original continent that exist in the kind of surrounded by newer continent in these regions. Earth was mostly water at this point. It was a large, I'm not sure how deep it was, but it was a large amount of water covering the Earth relative to today. First life began to evolve after the first billion years, so about 3.6 billion years ago is when the first bacteria began to evolve. Originally, I had said it was archaea was the first to evolve, but I think it's pretty clear that it was bacteria was the first to evolve. Archaea still exists today. They can live in places like your stomach or near the vents in the ocean, the thermal vents in the ocean. They don't need oxygen. They can survive on different molecules they can derive their energy from. So the number 5 I've already said was the Hadean, the first 600 million years, and then the Archean. So from 4 billion to 2.5 billion years was the Archean, and that 2.5 number, you can see it different. I change a little bit here and there, but we can double check that number, make sure that that's right. But those were the first two eons. At 2.3 billion years ago, a bacteria evolved. It's called cyanobacteria, and this was important because it produced oxygen. It conducted photosynthesis, and at that point, the Earth's atmosphere had very little oxygen in it, and it completely changed the atmosphere, and it poisoned a lot of the life that existed on Earth. It took a long time to develop the oxygen that we have today, but it was it began that process of changing the atmosphere. So number 7, what organisms evolved 2 billion years ago? That was the eukaryotic bacteria, or that unicellular life that evolved. It was different because it had membrane-bound organelles. It's believed that the mitochondria was its own cell that got incorporated into the eukaryotic, and the two had a symbiotic relationship where the mitochondria gave energy to the eukaryotic cell, and that's why mitochondria have their own kind of DNA, and they kind of do their own thing inside this cell to this day. So that's a little bit of kind of background to the eukaryotic bacteria, but eukaryotes went on to develop into modern life. And they had a nucleus, and they had those membrane-bound organelles. Number 8 is, I just answered it. They had the membrane-bound organelles and the nucleus that kind of directed the operations in the cell, which was different than the prokaryotes, which have no defined nucleus and don't have membrane-bound organelles. Number 9, the eon after the Archean was known as the Protozoic. This can translate into first life. Proto means first, zoic means life. 542 should be 541 here for number 10. I don't know why I put 542 in. This eon, the Protozoic lasted up until 541 million years ago. The nickname for it was the boring billions. So you had 2 billion years where you just had unicellular life. There 300 million years of this period Earth was covered by a sheet of ice or a very thick layer of glacier. It was called Snowball Earth. At 542 million years began the Cambrian period, also nicknamed the Cambrian explosion. The explosion refers to multicellular life existing. So it was a big step from the unicellular life that existed prior. And so you had things like trilobites, and we drew pictures of things like the hallucinogenia, the stick-looking creature. Nothing that exists then is alive now. There's obviously descendants from creatures that have evolved, like the horseshoe crab kind of looks like a trilobite, and some of the other creatures kind of look like shellfish, that exist, that modern shellfish that exist today. So there was a new eon started at 542 million years, and a new era started. The eon was called the Phanerozoic, which means visible life. You could see the life now, whereas unicellular, you couldn't. And also the Paleozoic era started, paleo meaning old life. So a lot of the creatures that were alive during the Paleozoic are now extinct. 13 and 14, 13 you should be able to answer no problem. 14, the second part of the question is called strata, and it's just referring to, when you go along the highway, you'll look up on the faces of rocks and you can see layers. Those are called strata, and those are the layers of deposition over millions and millions of years. You can see the strata in the rock layers. So, okay, those are the questions, the review, and that should be able to help you answer those questions.